Good day, it's Dr. Busen again. Going to do a presentation on the swing era, and it will be in two parts, so this is part one of it. And just wanted to tell you that at any time, if you want to pause the video, if you're taking notes or anything, kind of cash in on your ability to control the presentation. Okay, so swing era. Swing refers to music of large dance bands with written arrangements. Okay, I'm talking about the time frame, the beginning of swing bands, 1920 to 1935. So bands were getting larger and the style was beginning to develop, but the official swing era is 1935 to 1945. You have a little picture of Jimmy Lunsford Band of the 1930s. Three major bands in New York City in the 1920s, Charlie Johnson, McKinney's Cotton Pickers, and Fletcher Henderson. And they will be listening in this same shell as this video. There will be listening examples on many of these bands. Jazz migration. We already looked at the movement from New Orleans to Chicago. Well, now the focal point is New York. So the history of jazz, this migration was New Orleans to Chicago to New York. And the growing record industry attracted musicians to cities, and the big band was the main vehicle for jazz by the 1920s. The band evolved in numbers from 5 to 7, 9, 11, 13. So it's a gradual evolution as the bands got bigger. The music itself went from improvised polyphony of Dixieland, that means many melodies together, to homophonic texture of big bands. And homophonic means one main melody with chordal accompaniment. Okay, new breed of jazz musician in this swing era: Fletcher Henderson, Redman, Duke Ellington, Coleman Hawkins. They reflect a new breed of musician. And so the comparison, Dixieland evolved from military, brass and military bands, vaudeville circuits, and strictly dance bands. And as we move into the swing era, they were more musically educated and a cross-fertilization between music readers and non-music reading improvisers. Okay, so the ability to read music was something we saw more in the bands, and the music was more written down and planned. They still had plenty of improvisation. Spread of radio and recording and the development of new song forms. These are other traits of the swing era. So new song form is AABA. So each letter represents a section, an 8-bar section in the form. A is the first section, then the A section repeats, then a new section comes in of 8 bars, and then we return to the A section for a final 8-bar. And we will have some examples of the AABA form in the listening. Songs with greater harmonic sophistication, so the chords, the jazz language headed towards more harmonic sophistication. New York became the center of the music world, and Europe has its centers, but New York, as America becomes the bigger entertainment town. Recording companies is part of the reason. Publishing houses, music business activities were headquartered in New York City. Okay, the migration of swing. Benny Goodman sparked the beginning of the swing era on August 21st, 1935 at the Palmador Ballroom in Hollywood, California. And the media made such a big deal out of this that it's kind of documented as the start of the swing era. So when it was publicized by newspapers, radio, they just really were impressed with this particular performance, and it marks a date. By 1930, northern cities with a population of more than 60,000 blacks produced an important band. And we have examples here. So these are naming some of the bands in Washington, D.C. We have Duke Ellington, Baltimore, Chick Webb, Memphis, Jimmy Lunsford, St. Louis, the Missourians. Chicago was Armstrong and Hines, and in New York, Fletcher Henderson. Yeah, so these are all black big bands. And the map shows the route of the Great Migration. And you can think of a lot of the jazz in the same way the blues is mapped out here. So moving from New Orleans to Memphis to St. Louis to Chicago. I know B.B. King actually followed that very route. He worked in a radio station in Memphis, moved on to St. Louis, eventually to Chicago. And then there's another migration route from the south up to Washington, D.C. and to New York. Contributions of different bands to the tradition of jazz. Fletcher Henderson, he set up the pattern of brass and reeds, and the sections would each have 4 players each. Don Redman, first black band with a sponsored radio series. He was famous for that. And Benny Carter, the first band with 5 saxophones in 1933. The swing era was jazz's most popular period, and there were hundreds of bands, and swing era portrayed a more sleek and sophisticated image than the music of the 1920s. So I have a few images here of the style, the attire. Jazz was featured on countless radio shows, naming the Coca-Cola Spotlight Series, the Camel Hit Parade, Chesterfield Hour, Philip Morris Show. The majority of the sponsors were cigarette companies, and of course Coca-Cola. Thinking of the economics of this period, the swing era and the economy, the swing music pulled the American music industry out of the Great Depression, and hundreds of performance venues, the ballrooms. This is naming some of the ballrooms of the era: Roseland, Savoy, Cotton Club, Paradise, Blue Room. Theaters: the Paramount, Strand, Lowe, and the English. Movies. These are movies about the swing era. So there was Hollywood Hotel, The Fabulous Dorseys, Winter Wonderland, Swing Fever, and Stage Door Canteen. These are all movies that had swing music as a soundtrack, and they were portraying the swing era. And hotels: Pennsylvania, Manhattan Room. So the Hotel Pennsylvania had the Manhattan Room Lounge. Hotel New York had the Terrace Room, and the Lincoln Hotel had Blue Room. More on economic roles. During the Great Depression, record sales dropped. So in 1921, a recorded high of 106 million in retail sales. This dropped to a low of just 6 million in 1933. So that was a decline of 90%, and that was due to the Great Depression. By the 1930s, the record industry had begun to recover, and this is during the swing era 1935 to 1945. And there were 500,000 plus records made by big bands. Record companies, I'm going to name 4 of those. Columbia was a big one, Decca, RCA Victor, Volition. 2 kinds of smaller groups. So I'm going to speak to the smaller combos. A group within the band. So in other words, it was recruited from a big band. The players were members of a bigger band, and they just scaled it down for certain events. So the Cab Jivers, that came out of Cab Calloway's big band. The Wood Choppers came from the Woody Herman big band. The Kansas City 7 came from the Count Basie big band. And Benny Goodman's big band, they had trios, quartets, or sextets that were formulated from that big band. And a continuation, another type, was just an independent group that wasn't part of a big band. Naming those Art Tatum Trio, Quintet of Hot Club de France, which was a European band, jazz band, and Nat King Cole's Trio, and Coleman Hawkins. And we have a picture of the Quintet of Hot Club de France. And that is the end of part 1.